Today I want to share with you 5 healthy make-ahead cookie mixes, including sugar cookies, chocolate chip cookies, oatmeal raisin cookies, peanut butter cookies, and snickerdoodles. Hi sweet friends, I'm Mary and welcome to Mary's Nest, where I teach traditional cooking skills for making nutrient-dense foods like bone broth, ferments, sourdough, and more. So if you enjoy learning about those things, consider subscribing to my channel and don't forget to click on the little notification bell below. That'll let you know every time I upload a new video. Now the nice thing about healthy make-ahead cookie mixes is that they lend themselves, cookies in general, lend themselves very well to being made with whole grain flours and whole sugars. And those that lend themselves especially well to whole grains and whole sugars are your chocolate chip cookies, your oatmeal raisin cookies, and your peanut butter cookies. Now when it comes to sugar cookies and snickerdoodles, the color of those cookies is a lot paler, but they do lend themselves to incorporating some whole grains and whole sugars. It's just that with those two, we are also going to include some all-purpose flour to try and keep them looking somewhat similar to what we're used to when they're made 100% with all-purpose flour. But we're going to make them a little healthier. Now don't worry about writing any of this down, because if you open the description under this video, I'll have a link. It'll say recipes and there'll be a link next to it. If you click on that link, it'll take you over to my website and it'll take you directly to the blog post that corresponds with this video. And you'll be able to print out the recipes for all of the make-ahead mixes, and I'll also include how to turn these into the various cookies. So I'll have the ingredients for the make-ahead mix and then how to make a batch of sugar cookies or oatmeal cookies or so on and so forth. I'll have all the additional ingredients and instructions that you need. Now today, I'm making enough make-ahead mix to fill this half-gallon jar. This is a 64-ounce jar. And each of these jars, with it being filled with their mixes, will make 3 batches of cookies. And depending on the size that you make the cookie, each batch should probably produce 18 to 24 cookies. And depending on how you store your make-ahead mixes, they should have a shelf life of anywhere from 6 months to 1 year. So first we're going to go over the ingredients for the sugar cookies. And these are the type that you can roll out and use cookie cutters to make different shapes, which is especially nice as we approach the holidays. Now the first thing that you're going to want is 3 3/4 cups of a whole grain flour. Now I'm using just your traditional regular whole wheat flour that you can buy at the grocery store, but you can use any whole grain flour you want. If you like using the ancient grains like einkorn or spelt, you can definitely use that here. And a question that I often get is, can you use sprouted flour to make these cookies, or for that matter, any of the other make-ahead mixes that I've showed you, like the various baking mixes that we did about a week or so ago? Yes, you can use sprouted flour. And if you want to learn how to make your own sprouted flour, I'll be sure to leave a link in the description below to the video where I show you how to do that. And it's a lot easier than you think. So you've got your 3 3/4 cups of your whole grain flour. Then you're going to want 3 cups of all-purpose flour. I find that this ratio works well to still add some good nutrition to the sugar cookies with the whole grain flour, but at the same time, keep them a little lighter in color and texture that we're generally more used to when we see sugar cookies. Next, you're going to want 1 1/2 teaspoons of baking powder and 3/4 teaspoons of salt. And you just want a fine ground salt. I use a fine ground sea salt, but you can use whatever salt you have. Then you're going to want 2 1/4 cups of some type of whole sweetener. Now I'm using sucanat, and basically what sucanat is just dried cane juice, dried sugar cane juice. And sucanat is a made-up word that basically takes some letters from sugar, some letters from cane, and some letters from natural. So sucanat, sugar cane natural. But you can use any whole sugar that you have on hand. You could use maple sugar. The taste really does, I use maple sugar a lot. And I don't find that the taste comes through very strongly, and it's lighter in color, so that can be an option. Other options could be coconut sugar or date sugar. Any whole sugar will help, or whole sweetener will help improve the nutritional value. However, if you are right at the beginning of your journey from making the transition from a processed foods kitchen to a traditional foods kitchen, you can use white sugar here. The fact that you're starting to at least incorporate some whole grains into your baking is a good place to start. So you can use the white sugar, and then over time you can start to incorporate the whole sweeteners. So you could even at some point have maybe half white sugar and then half whole sweetener, whatever one you decide that you like the flavor of the best. And this is exceptionally helpful when you are going through the transition, and especially if you're feeding your family that may be used, especially children, that may be used to a certain taste or a certain texture from maybe store-bought goods or goods that are just maybe even home-baked with just all-purpose flour and white sugar. So go slowly as you incorporate these different whole flours, whole grain flours and whole sugars. And I'll explain all of this in detail over on my website, so don't worry if you're wondering what the difference is going to be if you bake this with white sugar as to whole grain sugar. I'll explain all of that in the directions. Now the first thing I'm going to do is just basically whisk the all-purpose flour in very well with the whole grain flour, and then I'm also going to add in my baking powder, and we'll get that last little bit out. And I'm going to add in my salt, and then we'll whisk all of this together, and then we'll put the sugar in last, because I'll show you why I like to do the sugar last. Now when it comes to incorporating the sucanat, I like to use a strainer, because sucanat, as I said, is dried cane juice. It's not unlike a light brown sugar or dark brown sugar, and it can have little clumps in it. So I find that if I put this through a strainer, I can break up all those clumps, making it a lot easier to incorporate it into my mix. And you may find the same if you're using maple sugar, or if you're using coconut sugar, or you're using date sugar. You might find the same to be true. So I recommend using some type of strainer. So I just work all that sugar, that sucanat, through the strainer, and there might be a few little bits that you really can't break up. Don't worry about it. Now we're just going to whisk this together real well to make sure we get all of that sucanat well distributed with our flour. Next, once you get your mix all well mixed, all you need to do is put it into your jar. And a funnel works really well if you have one for this job. And if not, you can just sort of roll up a little piece of paper. Sometimes I use a paper towel, but one of you left me a great comment saying that if you don't have a funnel, but you have maybe a piece of cardstock, like the paper that's a little, has a little more firmness to it, that makes a great funnel, and that would make sense. Now once you get your mix in your jar, you've got a couple of options on how you want to store this. You can just take your lid and put it on like that, and then this is a great way to store this in your everyday working pantry if you think that you're going to use this over the next 6 months. Now I also want to share with you some alternate ways that you can store your make-ahead mixes, especially since over the last couple of months so many of us have been talking about our extended pantries, or what we call often our prepper pantries, where we store our backup supplies that are handy for us to refurbish our main working pantry, and also come in very handy in the event of, like we've talked about, emergencies like illness or weather, or job loss, or something like what we're going through now. And so how can we store these make-ahead mixes to extend their shelf life? So we've got some options. Number one, the first thing that you can do is use a silica gel pack. And what's great about this is that, now this is a food grade silica gel pack, and I'll put a link to the ones I like in the description below. But look for these. You can get them online. Sometimes you can find them in the canning sections of your grocery store or the big box stores, or sometimes maybe in the camping areas. And so just keep your eyes open for them. But what this does is keeps any moisture from developing in your mixture. And so that's a very good thing whenever you're working with something that is dry, and you want to make sure that it stays dry and doesn't start to degrade and become clumpy and so on and so forth. And all you need is to just shimmy it down into your mixture. You can even put it in as you're adding in your mixture to your jar. And what's nice is whenever you're dealing with whole grains, moisture is really the enemy of whole grains, because whole grains contain the bran and the germ, and they have oils in them. And when water hits them, or moisture hits them, they're more inclined to go rancid quicker than just a plain all-purpose flour. So you can just put your silica gel pack in, and you can just put your regular lid back on. And this really helps in terms of when you're keeping it in your working pantry. Now, I know those who've been with me for a while know what I'm talking about when I talk about the working pantry and extended pantry and so on and so forth. But if you're new here, I generally talk about something that I refer to as the four corners pantry. The first corner being your main working pantry. That's the pantry in your kitchen. It may be a closet or a cupboard, but something that you access on a daily basis. Then you have your refrigerator, which is the second corner. Your freezer is the third corner. And then the fourth corner is your extended pantry. And that's where you keep your backup supplies. And your extended pantry basically is what you use to restock your main working pantry. But it also serves another purpose, in that if you're not able to go grocery shopping, maybe there's some emergency like an illness or bad weather or job loss, or like what we're going through now, and you have backup supplies in your extended pantry, when your main working pantry becomes quite low, you have your extended pantry to rely on with weeks, months, or maybe even up to a year or more of food that you can then be restocking your working pantry with, and being assured that you can make meals and feed yourself and your family and so on and so forth. So something like a silica gel pack is very handy, for just using to put something in your working pantry, but it can also be helpful if you're deciding to store this in your extended pantry. Now, if you are going to store this in your extended pantry, you may want to think of some other options for sealing your jar. Now, something I like to do is to take a canning lid, and this is just the canning lid and the canning ring or band that came with this jar. And then what I like to do is you just put the canning lid on like this, and then if you've seen this little gadget, it's the handheld food saver gadget that I like to use, and you also have a little lid adapter. They make both wide mouth and regular mouth size for the different size jars, whether it's wide mouth or regular mouth jar. And this is a wide mouth jar, so you just go ahead and you stick that down firmly. And then you take your little handheld device. There's a hole here. There's a hole on top of the can or bottle of the jar adapter, and you just line them up, and then you just start to suck out the air. And sometimes you hear a little change in sound. I've shared with you, those of you who've been with me for a while have seen me use this, and you do hear a little change in the sound, and it's usually a good indication that it sucked out all the air it's going to suck out, but you may not hear it over the camera. But all you do is just press the button and start to suck out the air. And what you'll find, a good way to know that you've probably pretty much sucked out all the air, is that the device will actually feel attached to this jar adapter. And I don't think I can pick, this is kind of heavy, so I think if I try to pick it up, as I've done with some of the smaller jars, it'll detach, but you'll feel that, geez, it's attached. So all you want to do is then, see, it makes that little popping sound, is release this, and then we're going to pull off this adapter. And now once you get your adapter off, you'll find that this has a very tight seal that it's very difficult to try to, I don't know if I can pick this up, but there we go. It's very difficult to pull off. You would need, some sort of can opener to just wedge it off. Or someone told me, it was interesting, I read in the comments that some of you know how to use the ring of your canning, or the band or ring of your canning jar to loosen the lid. So that's a clever option as well. But as I said, this is on very firmly. You really can't pull it off manually. So now you can store this in your extended pantry and hopefully be extending the life a little longer than the 6 months. So this is the type of can opener that I'm just talking about, not the pointed edge, just the dull edge, and then you'll just loosen that right off. So we'll go ahead and do that so you can hear the sound. Yeah, that was a good seal. So generally what I'll do is, if I want to store this in my extended pantry as opposed to in my working pantry, if I think that I'm not going to be using this regularly, then instead of my twist-on lid, I'll just use one of these canning lids as I showed you with the food saver to get out as much oxygen as possible, have my little silica gel pack in here, and then I feel, okay, I think that's going to stay fresh for anywhere maybe from 6 months to 1 year. And now that's not to say that you can't do this if you want in your working pantry as well, to help keep it even fresher. So that's an option if you decide. I normally always put a little silica gel pack in, whether I'm storing it in my working pantry or my extended pantry. So either way can work very well. Now I want to mention something that I forgot, because I know I give a lot of instruction on these different mixes, but if you want to jump ahead to the particular mix that you're interested in, if there's just one or two, I'll be sure to put the timestamps in the description below, as well as the pinned comment, so you can jump around. Now we're going to make the chocolate chip cookie mix. And for this, you can use 100% whole grain flour. Chocolate chip cookies lend themselves very well to whole grain, so you don't need to add any all-purpose flour. So what I've got here are 4½ cups of whole wheat flour. And that's just the regular whole wheat flour from the grocery store. But you can certainly use any whole grain flour that you want, including your ancient grains or your sprouted flours. Next, you're going to need 1½ teaspoons of baking soda, 3/4 of a teaspoon of baking powder, and 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt. And you just want a fine ground sea salt. And then you're going to want 3 cups of a whole sweetener. And again, I'm just using Sucanat, but you can use any whole sweetener you like. And if, as I've mentioned before, you're on your transition from a processed foods kitchen to a traditional foods kitchen, you can certainly use white sugar. Now, I want to mention something about using a whole grain sugar in this particular recipe. This is going to make a nice, soft, chewy chocolate chip cookie. If you like a crisp chocolate chip cookie, then you would want to cut this amount in half and use a whole sweetener like your Sucanat or your maple sugar, date sugar, coconut sugar, whatever you choose, and then half white sugar. And that will give you more of your crisp chocolate chip cookie. And then you're going to want 3 cups of chocolate chips. And you can use a semi-sweet or a bittersweet, whatever you like. And you can certainly add more chocolate chips if you like. These chocolate chips I find are a little on the large size. These are the Ghirardelli brand, and that I like to get. I get them at my local grocery store. And so I'm just going with 3 cups. But you can certainly add more if your chocolate chips are smaller. So to my whole wheat flour, I'm going to go ahead, add in my baking soda, my baking powder, my salt, and we're going to give this a good whisk around to incorporate all of those little additions with our whole wheat flour. Next, like I did before, I'm going to use the strainer just to make sure I get out all the little clumps. And we'll just sift this right into our flour, and then we'll give it a good mix. Now I'm going to get this Sucanat well distributed amongst all of the flour. And like whole grains, these whole sweeteners work very well in chocolate chip cookie recipes as well. Now last but not least, in go our chocolate chips. And something that I want to mention is when you print out the recipe or read it online, whatever you like to do, it'll have how much of all of these mixtures you would use to make one batch of cookies. And what you can do, if you like, you can get a smaller jar and you can make just one batch and you can layer it rather than mixing it up like we did. You can have your whole grain flour and then your other little additions and then your whole sugar and then your chocolate chips. And it's so pretty and it makes a lovely gift. Now we'll just go ahead and fill our jar. Woo! And as you're filling your jar, if you find that it's kind of sort of starting to come to the top, you can just give it a little jiggle like this to help things settle as you're filling it so that you can fit the 3 batches of make-ahead mixes into the one jar. You can go ahead and put in your silica gel pack if you want. You can then put just your twist lid on, or you can go ahead and seal it like how I showed you before with the food saver, and now you're all ready for the pantry. Now we're ready to make the oatmeal raisin mix, and this makes a wonderful soft and chewy oatmeal raisin cookie. Now what you're going to need are 2 1/4 cups of a whole grain flour. I'm using whole wheat, and oatmeal raisin cookies lend themselves beautifully to whole grain flours, so you shouldn't need to add any all-purpose flour. But as to the whole grain flour, again, whatever you like. If you want to use one of the ancient grains or sprouted flour, by all means it'll work perfectly. Then you're going to want 4 1/2 cups of old-fashioned rolled oats. Next, you're going to want 1 1/2 teaspoons of baking soda and 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt. And you're just going to want a fine ground, I'm using a sea salt, but any fine ground salt will do. And next, you're going to want 3 teaspoons of ground cinnamon. And next, I'm just going to give this all a good mix to make sure that everything is well incorporated. And next, we'll sift in our sucanat or whatever whole sugar you're using. Now we'll just give this a good mix in. And what's nice is we only needed 1 1/2 cups of sugar for this mix because we've got the sweetness of the raisins. So this is nice. This is sort of a lower sugar cookie. Now we're going to go ahead and add in 3 cups of raisins. And oatmeal raisin cookies are another nice mix like the chocolate chip cookies, that if you just do a one portion or one batch amount in a smaller jar and you do it in layers, it can look very pretty and make a lovely gift. Alrighty, now we'll get ready to fill our jar. And I want to mention, if you be sure to label your jars so you know what's what. And you can also, when you print out the recipe over on my website, you can print out the directions that are needed for how to turn these make-ahead cookie mixes into the actual cookie. And what I do is, in the recipe, I put the instructions just sort of in one little paragraph. You'll see when you go over there. So it makes it easy for you to print it out, cut it out, and tape it to your jar. If you like to do that, you can also always tape it to the inside of a cupboard or the inside of your pantry drawer. And again, as you're filling this, there's a lot of air space. So if you give it a little shake, it'll help compress it. And something I want to mention about making this oatmeal raisin cookie mix, if you just make one cookie mix, this is a great one to make because it's great that it has the oats in it. You're adding fiber and more nutrition in addition to the whole grains and the whole sweeteners that you're using. Plus, raisins are nutritious as well. But it's very versatile. You can add chocolate chips to this and make it a chocolate chip oatmeal cookie. You can turn this into cowboy cookies, which are those cowboys that my mother used to call them kitchen sink cookies. And we never quite knew why they were called that because they had everything in them but the kitchen sink. But cowboy cookies will add the raisins, nuts, chocolate chips, coconut. And so starting with this, you've got part of the job complete. I'm just going to pack my little silica gel pack in there. This one's filled to the rim almost. And now lid on, and we're all set to put this in the pantry. Now we're going to make our peanut butter cookie mix. And peanut butter cookies, like the oatmeal raisin cookies and like the chocolate chip cookies, also lend themselves very well to using whole grains and a whole sweetener. Now the nice thing about this mix is this is very flexible. When you get ready to make the cookies, you can definitely use peanut butter, but you can use any kind of nut butter that you like. So if you wanted to turn these into almond butter cookies, you could definitely do that. And the reason is we're not going to actually add the nut butter to this mixture. That would really shorten the shelf life. Instead, what I've got here for you is the basic dry ingredients that go into making peanut butter or other nut butter cookies. So you'll have your mix all ready, and then all you'll need to do is add your peanut butter, an egg, and some butter, some regular butter. But I'll have all those instructions over with the printable recipe. So don't worry, I explain everything thoroughly. But this is your basic dry mix that'll make it very easy for you to just pull some peanut butter cookies or other nut butter cookies together quickly. Now what you're going to need is 3 3/4 cups of a whole grain flour. And again, I know it's the cooking teacher in me, I repeat a lot, but you can definitely use any whole grain flour, any of the ancient grains, as well as sprouted flour. But I've just got the basic whole wheat flour that's easy to find at the grocery store. Next, you're going to want 2 1/4 teaspoons of baking soda. We'll just go ahead and sprinkle that right in. Next, you're going to want 1 1/2 teaspoons of baking powder. We'll go ahead and throw that in. And then next, 3/4 teaspoon of salt. And again, just fine ground sea salt is what I use, but whatever you have, any fine ground table salt will work too. Then I'm just going to mix this up really well to make sure all of those additions are well incorporated with the flour. And next we're going to add in our 3 cups of sweetener. And this again, I'm just using Sucanat, but use whatever you like. Now we're just going to mix this all up to get the sugar fully incorporated throughout the flour. And now we'll decant this right down into our jar. Now I want to mention a shortcut that you could sort of do in the case of making a make-ahead peanut butter mix would be to use that defatted peanut butter powder. But I know for some that can be hard to find and it can be a little costly. So I prefer just to make a mix like this and then add whatever peanut butter or nut butter that I want to add after the fact, you know, once I get ready to make the cookies. But that's certainly something you can look into if you can find or like using that defatted peanut butter powder. I've got this all in my jar, lid on, ready for the pantry. Now we're going to move on to making our Snickerdoodle mix. Now if you're not familiar with Snickerdoodles, they're a delicious cookie and actually one of my husband's favorites. They're sort of like a sugar cookie, but they have a very unique, slightly like a little bit of a tangy flavor to them. And they have a nice sort of soft center, a little bit of firmness on the exterior, and then they're dusted with a little bit of sugar cinnamon on top. Now, like the sugar cookie mixture, Snickerdoodles work better with a combination of flours so that they more resemble what a traditional Snickerdoodle looks like when it's made with just all-purpose flour. So what I've got here is 2 1/2 cups of whole grain flour. I'm using whole wheat flour. Again, use whatever whole grain flour you like, including the ancient grains or sprouted flour. And then I've got 2 cups of all-purpose flour. Next, what you're going to need, which is the key ingredient to making a Snickerdoodle, and that's cream of tartar. And you're going to need 4 1/2 teaspoons of cream of tartar. Now, cream of tartar should be easy to find at your grocery store. It's sold in the spice section, and this one is just by McCormick. You know, it's a very common brand, and it should be very easy to find. You know, as I've shared with you in the past, you know, I live in a small town. We have a great grocery store, though, but they always have cream of tartar, and I've been seeing it in grocery stores for years. But if you want to make this mix like right now and you don't want to go to the grocery store and you don't have cream of tartar in your pantry, you can use baking powder. But baking powder, although it'll give the cookie a somewhat similar texture, it will have a slightly different flavor because it's this cream of tartar that gives the Snickerdoodle its distinct flavor. However, if you want to just leave out the baking powder and you want to leave out the cream of tartar, you can do that. And then I'll show you in the directions how to make these snickerdoodles to give them that little bit of tangy flavor that the cream of tartar would have given them. And what you're going to do is you're still going to have your baking soda and your salt and your sugar and your flours in your pre-made mix. But when you go to make the cookies, in addition to the other wet ingredients that I have you add to the dry mix to make your cookies, you're going to add some lemon juice. And I'll have I'll have all the right amounts in the recipe over on my website. So you can still make these even if you don't have the cream of tartar handy. So we'll go ahead and we'll sprinkle our cream of tartar into our dry mix. And next you're going to need 1½ teaspoons of baking soda. Now, you definitely want to use this baking soda if you're not using the cream of tartar and you're going to go with the option of adding lemon juice when you actually make the cookies. Now, I like to, in addition to the cream of tartar, I like to add baking soda. I find that it really helps with the final product, the texture that I'm looking for in my snickerdoodle. But you will see some recipes that don't call for adding baking soda. So if you have a favorite snickerdoodle recipe that you've made in the past and it didn't include baking soda and you just want to add the cream of tartar, you can do that. But I'm going to go ahead and add in my 1½ teaspoons of baking soda. And then next you're going to want 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt. And this again, just a fine ground salt. I've got a sea salt, but table salt, whatever you have will work great, just as long as it's fine ground. Next, I'm just going to go ahead and give this a good mix around to make sure that we incorporate all of those dry ingredients. Next, you're going to add 2 1/4 cups of whatever whole sweetener you've decided to use. And again, if you're on your journey from processed foods kitchen to traditional foods kitchen and you are still using white sugar, by all means you can use that in this recipe. And now we're just going to mix in this sugar real well to get it completely distributed with the flour and the other dry ingredients. Well, I've got this nicely mixed up and it's ready to decant. And I just want to mention about the cinnamon sugar topping that is traditionally sprinkled on top of your snickerdoodle. You can definitely make that in a make-ahead batch as well. And if you want to do that, it would be 3/4 of a cup of whatever whole sweetener that you're using and 3 tablespoons of cinnamon. And you'll just mix that together, put it in a jar, and then it's ready for, you'll use 1/3 of that to sprinkle on your cookies when you get ready to bake a batch. But you can also just pull that together in a smaller amount when you're ready to bake your snickerdoodles. And I'll put all that information in the printed recipe, so don't worry. I've got my silica gel pack in there, lid on, and now my snickerdoodle make-ahead mix is all ready for the pantry. Now that you know how to make your 5 healthy make-ahead cookie mixes, be sure to click on this video over here where I show you how to make more make-ahead healthy mixes, including a cornbread mix, a brownie mix, pancake mix, biscuit mix, and more. And I'll see you over there in my Texas Hill Country Kitchen. Love and God bless.